At the court of Versailles, everyday life was subject to strict regulation. Which of these French manners at Versailles were the most bizarre and disgusting? Let's find out. French etiquette rules. The Palace of Versailles was well known for its beautiful architecture and for its strict rules of etiquette. These etiquette rules were very well known. Every courtier was responsible for providing service to the monarch and adhering to the traditions of the court. Unfortunately, many of the rules were completely absurd. It wouldn't be completely inaccurate to say that the bizarre French etiquette rules, rather than the king, were in charge at Versailles. 1. Courtiers might answer the call of nature anywhere. One of the strangest and most disgusting etiquette rules was the one that dictated when and where a courtier might answer the call of nature. The French authorities, who didn't seem to care about where people had to go to the bathroom, were very strange. According to the memoirs written by Louis de Versailles, Duc de Saint-Simon, and François de Brancas, known as the Princess de Harcourt, had the habit of answering the call of nature in the hallways, which annoyed the attendants who were responsible for cleaning up the mess afterwards. Now, you might be wondering why the princess would have done something as disgusting and strange as that. Weren't there any sanitary facilities at Versailles? To put it simply, she thought that her royal blood was just too classy, making her better than others. It would have been an insult to her royal status if she had been required to stop what she was doing and use a stool. So she didn't stop to pick up the trash, but just walked past it as she went, like nothing strange happened. It is interesting to note that Versailles lacked a proper sewage system because the courtiers did not see the necessity for it. Basically, human waste was just everywhere. Everyone who went to the palace at that time noticed how unpleasant and disgusting it was. 2. The courtiers were using their nails when they wanted to enter a room instead of just knocking on the door. How much more convenient is it to knock on the door and then walk inside the room after you've done that? It's kind of convenient, isn't it? But even something as normal as the act of knocking was a ritual. The act of knocking on the door was strictly governed, and people had to scrape their fingernails against the door frame instead of knocking on the door with their knuckles. It is interesting to note that the procedure was the only way via which one may notify the other that they wanted to enter the room. The custom of banging on doors to announce one's appearance became socially unacceptable at the royal palace of Versailles. The other option was to use a fingernail to make marks on the wooden doors. To be more specific, the pinky nail on the left hand was the nail that was officially chosen. It wasn't enough to just scrape at the door. This was just the first step. After that, the individual was required to wait patiently until a doorman opened the door and officially granted permission to enter. Even the type of door that was being scraped was significant. Versailles featured multiple double doors. Only the king was permitted to enter through both doors simultaneously when they were opened for him to enter, while others were only allowed to use one door. The use of such a procedure was accompanied by a strange custom of requiring courtiers to grow one of their fingernails specifically for the purpose of carrying out the act. Number 3. It was an incredible honor to observe the king naked. The behaviors that the French connected with privileges were extremely strange, to say the least. The times that the royal family woke up and went to sleep were two of the most important times of the day for the nobility, as it was at these times that they had the honor of attending to the king or queen. The king was roused from sleep by the first valet de chambre, who said, "Sir, it's time to get up." The getting up ceremony started when the first doctor and first surgeon paid a visit. After the sovereign had been washed, combed, and shaved, members of the entourage, those with high positions who enjoyed the privilege of attending such times, entered the king's bedchamber in succession. This was followed by the arrival of the officers of the chamber and of the clothes storehouse arrived for the magnificent getting up ceremony. During this time, the king was dressed and served soup for breakfast. This ritual was open to the closest royal servants as well as the most important members of the court who were given permission to watch it. The going to bed ceremony likely had somewhere about 100 onlookers. The public ceremony that took place when the monarch went to his bedroom was the exact opposite of the one that took place when he got up in the morning. Historically, the person who was given the honor of giving the king his shirt was considered to hold the highest position. Why? As he was the one who was able to catch a glimpse of a naked royal figure in all its splendor. 4. Who could sit where was based on hierarchy. Who was supposed to take a seat in the king's presence was a fact that was repeated throughout the palace and was widely known and accepted by everybody. Only the monarchs with high status were permitted to actually sit down, while the king was relaxing in his armchair and the queen was seated next to him. Even the seating arrangements were based on the status of the occupants. Royal princes and princesses were presented with armless chairs, but dukes and duchesses were only allowed to sit on stools. Because so many people wanted to be in the same room as the king, the politics around the seating arrangement in the palace were extremely controversial. There was a time when the Princess de Harcourt forcibly pulled a duchess from her stool since there was nowhere else for her to sit. This event is documented in history. Courtiers were typically restricted to sitting at the card table because there was no other available seating. When you were allowed to sit on an armchair, you were likely to have a very high status, followed by an armless chair, a sofa, a high stool, a low stool, and finally standing. There were 2 plush armchairs set aside for the king and queen. Only other kings were given such a distinction. Seeing as how Louis XIV would never permit Madame de Maintenon to sit in an armchair in his presence. Some events, such as Madame de Maintenon not being permitted to sit in an armchair in the king's presence due to her lower rank, are taken as evidence of their secret marriage. On the other hand, Madame de Montespan, who was the mother of the king's many children and the de facto queen of Versailles, was never presented with a stool due to her husband's anger over her affair with the king. Number 5. The color red on a man's heels was a symbol of nobility. The French court was where the trend of wearing shoes with high heels first emerged. Louis XIV became fascinated by the heels worn by Persians while riding horses in wars. Louis XIV believed that heels were a sign of nobility and carried this concept to the next level by insisting that his courtiers wore red heels. He also issued a rule stating that only aristocrats were permitted to possess such items. 6. The removal of the headwear. Some simple tasks, like taking off the hat, were also affected by the ranking system, making it seem excessive and confusing to follow. The king only took off his hat when he saw a prince from the same family. Aside from that, he would only lift it when he met a nobleman, or just touch it when he met a gentleman. So the station of the other person was the deciding factor in how a high-ranking person felt about their relationship. 7. The monarchs were too busy sleeping to get up when guests arrived. Now, this one may not come as a surprise anymore, now that we're familiar with the ridiculous French etiquette rules. Those with the highest privileges were exempt from the rule that compelled others to get out of bed when they were paid a visit by another monarch. The bedroom parade was very popular at the time, which is why the king's bed, which was a piece of furniture with a lot of decorations, was the center of attention at Versailles in the 17th century. 8. A ceremonial practice consisting of literally witnessing the king dine. The nobles would sit on the stool so that they could keep an eye on the king and queen as they dined, because it was considered a privilege to do so. The seemingly insignificant act of eating was interpreted as some kind of ritual. There were other meal events that were officially scheduled, and more than 300 guests would simply watch the king and queen eat during those dinners. The privilege of being allowed to stand near the royal table was considered a royal favor, despite the fact that you weren't allowed to eat or drink while doing so. Which of these French etiquette rules do you think is the weirdest? Share your thoughts in the comments section. That is it for today, everyone. We hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so that you will be the first to know about our new videos filled with crazy history facts.